The gate agent stared at Judge Veronica Lawson's boarding pass like it was written in a foreign language. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this seat doesn't seem right." Judge Lawson looked up from her legal briefs. She'd paid $15,200 for this last-minute first-class ticket to London, a rare vacation after closing a landmark civil rights case. "What do you mean it doesn't seem right?" "First class is, well, it's very expensive. Are you sure you booked the correct cabin?" The condescension in the woman's voice was unmistakable. Judge Lawson had spent 25 years on the bench, presiding over some of the most high-profile cases in federal court. She'd sentenced corporate executives, overturned discriminatory laws, and written legal opinions that changed precedent. And now she was being questioned about whether she understood how to book a plane ticket? "I'm quite sure," Judge Lawson said, her tone dropping into what attorneys in her courtroom called the voice, calm, measured, and absolutely terrifying. "I purchased seat 2K, first class. That's what my boarding pass shows. Is there a problem?" The agent, Sandra Pierce, shifted uncomfortably. "I just need to verify the payment method." "You need to do what?" "Sometimes fraudulent bookings slip through. High-value tickets purchased last minute can be suspicious." Judge Lawson felt her blood pressure rise, but her face remained perfectly neutral. 25 years of maintaining composure in contentious courtrooms had trained her well. "Let me make sure I understand. You're suggesting my legitimate purchase is potentially fraudulent." "I'm just following protocol. Show me the protocol. I'd like to see the written policy that allows you to question confirmed passengers about payment verification." Sandra's eyes widened. Most passengers, when challenged, became defensive or angry. This woman was asking for documentation like she was preparing for trial. "Ma'am, I don't have time for—" "You have time, because I'm not boarding this aircraft until you either produce the policy that authorizes this verification, or you admit this is discriminatory treatment." A line was forming behind her. Other first-class passengers, all white, all waved through without question, were starting to murmur. One man in an expensive suit pulled out his phone and started recording. Sandra called her supervisor, a middle-aged man named Gary Hoffman, who arrived with the weary expression of someone who dealt with difficult passengers before. "What seems to be the issue?" Gary asked, directing the question at Sandra rather than Judge Lawson. "This passenger's ticket is flagged for verification." "Flagged by whom?" "I booked directly through your airline's website using my personal credit card. There's been no fraud alert, no payment issue, no problem whatsoever until I arrived at this gate." Gary glanced at his tablet. "The system sometimes flags unusual booking patterns. What's unusual? The fact that I'm black and in first class?" The gate area went silent. Other passengers stopped talking. The man recording moved closer. Gary's face flushed. "Ma'am, this has nothing to do with race. Then explain what triggered the flag. Was it the booking date? The payment method? The destination? Give me one objective criterion that doesn't involve my appearance." Gary couldn't, because there wasn't one. Judge Lawson pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my clerk. I need her to document this interaction and pull the statutes on consumer protection violations and discriminatory practices in interstate commerce." "Your clerk?" Gary looked confused. "Yes, I'm a federal judge, Judge Veronica Lawson, United States District Court, and what you're doing right now is going to be very thoroughly examined." The color drained from Gary's face. Sandra actually took a step backward. The man who'd been recording spoke up. "I'm Paul Martinez, civil rights attorney. I've been filming this entire interaction. Judge Lawson is correct. This is discriminatory treatment, and you've just admitted there's no legitimate basis for the verification request." Gary tried to recover. "Judge Lawson, I apologize. There's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You made an assumption based on my race. You questioned my ability to afford this ticket despite having zero evidence of fraud. And now that you know I'm a federal judge, suddenly it's a misunderstanding? What happens to passengers who don't have my credentials? Do they just accept this treatment because they don't have the power to fight back? She let the question hang in the air. I'll be boarding now, in seat 2K, which I purchased legally. But this conversation isn't over. Expect formal documentation requests from my office, and expect to explain your verification protocols under oath. She boarded the plane. Gary and Sandra stood frozen at the gate. The recording went viral before the plane took off. By the time Judge Lawson landed in London 12 hours later, it had 8 million views. News organizations were calling it the judge who wouldn't back down. Civil rights groups were demanding investigations, and the airline was in full crisis mode. But Judge Lawson was on vacation. She spent a week in London, touring museums and attending theater performances. She didn't give interviews, she didn't issue statements. She simply waited. When she returned to the United States, she did something the airline never expected. She filed a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation. Not a lawsuit, not yet, a complaint requesting a full investigation into the airline screening practices. The DOT took her complaint seriously. A federal judge alleging discrimination gets attention. They launched an investigation, pulling 5 years of data on verification requests at that airport. What they found was damning. Over 5 years, the airline had flagged 1,847 first-class passengers for payment verification. Of those, 1,623 were people of color. White passengers in first class flagged 224 times, and 189 of those flags had documented reasons like declined credit cards or actual fraud alerts. The remaining 35 questionable flags versus 1,623 for passengers of color told a clear story. The airline had been systematically profiling minority passengers in premium cabins. But here's where Judge Lawson's legal expertise created something unprecedented. She didn't just file a lawsuit seeking damages for herself. She petitioned the DOT to revoke the airline's operating certificate for systemic civil rights violations, the corporate death penalty. The airline panicked. Losing their operating certificate would shut them down completely. They immediately requested a settlement conference. Judge Lawson refused. I'm not interested in being bought off. I'm interested in systemic change. The DOT scheduled a formal hearing. Airlines almost never face certificate revocation hearings. It's the nuclear option, reserved for catastrophic safety failures or egregious violations. But Judge Lawson had made the case that civil rights violations were just as serious. The hearing lasted 3 days. Judge Lawson presented herself as a witness, a rare move, but she wanted the panel to hear directly from someone with her credentials and experience. She testified about the humiliation, the assumption of fraud, and the instant change in treatment once her title was revealed. Its message was clear. A black woman in first class must prove she belongs. A federal judge gets an apology. But what about the teacher, the nurse, the small business owner who doesn't have those credentials? They just accept the humiliation because they don't have the power to fight back. She let that question hang in the air. Then she did something brilliant. She subpoenaed the airline's internal communications. Emails revealed gate agents had been encouraged to trust your instincts about unusual passengers in premium cabins. Training materials showed examples of suspicious behavior that were thinly veiled racial stereotyping. Performance reviews praised agents for protecting revenue by catching fraudulent bookings, a metric that incentivized racial profiling. The evidence was overwhelming. The DOT panel issued a preliminary ruling. The airline had 90 days to implement comprehensive reforms or face certificate suspension. The reforms were extensive. elimination of all subjective verification protocols, implementation of objective fraud detection systems that flag transactions, not people, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing employees, third-party auditing of all passenger complaints with demographic data publicly reported quarterly, and a passenger bill of rights displayed prominently at every gate, and a $12 million fund to compensate other passengers who'd been similarly profiled. But Judge Lawson had one more demand. She wanted the 2 employees who'd stopped her to complete 200 hours of community service with civil rights organizations, not fired, rehabilitated. She believed in restorative justice, even for those who had wronged her. Sandra Pierce and Gary Hoffman spent 6 months volunteering with organizations that fought discrimination. Both later stated publicly that the experience had fundamentally changed their understanding of implicit bias. The airline CEO resigned, the VP of Customer Experience was terminated, and Judge Lawson's case became required reading in law schools nationwide as an example of
Judge Veronica Lawson's story is different because of how she used her power. She could have accepted a quiet settlement and moved on. Most discrimination cases end that way. Private payments, confidentiality agreements, no systemic change. Instead, she weaponized her expertise. She didn't just sue for damages. She went for the airline's operating certificate, forcing them to choose between comprehensive reform or going out of business. That's the kind of pressure that creates real change. The $15,200 ticket was never really about the money. It was about the assumption that a black woman couldn't afford it, that she must have stolen it, scammed it, or somehow didn't legitimately belong in that seat. And when those assumptions were challenged by someone with 25 years of legal expertise and federal judicial authority, the entire system cracked open. Here's the most important part. 1,623 passengers of color had been profiled over 5 years. Judge Lawson was just one. But she was the one with the knowledge, resources, and platform to force accountability. She turned her personal humiliation into industry-wide reform that protected thousands of future passengers. That's strategic justice. That's using privilege and power not just for personal vindication, but for systemic change. If this story changed how you think about discrimination in travel, hit subscribe. I cover these cases because they show us how individual courage creates collective progress. Drop a comment. Do you think judges and other authority figures have a special responsibility to fight discrimination when they experience it? Share this video, because Judge Lawson didn't just win her case, she changed the rules of the game for everyone who flies after her. A $15,200 ticket, a 25-year legal career, and the determination to make respect the default instead of the exception. That's how you change an industry. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.